The autumn of 1887 settled over Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, with a chill that seemed to seep not just into the bones, but into the very spirit of the small, secluded town. A persistent, damp fog clung to the gabled roofs of the Victorian houses and snaked through the skeletal trees lining the cobbled streets. The air, usually crisp with the scent of burning leaves, now carried an unsettling dampness, a precursor to the strange occurrences that would soon grip the community. Elias Vance, a man whose life had been shaped by the rigid structures of logic and reason, found himself increasingly disquieted by the subtle shifts in the town's mood. A respected architect, he had designed many of Willow Creek's sturdy, practical buildings, each a testament to his belief in order. But order was slowly unraveling. It began with whispers, hushed conversations in the general store, glances exchanged over church pews. The source? The children, not just one or two, but a growing number of them, all plagued by the same terrifying nightmares. Young Thomas Miller, a boy no older than 8, was the first to openly speak of it. His parents, initially dismissive, grew concerned when Thomas began waking in cold sweats, his screams echoing through their small farmhouse. He spoke of a shadow man with eyes like embers, lurking in a dense, silent forest, always searching, always near. "He wants to take something," Thomas would sob, clutching his tattered teddy bear. Soon after, others followed. Sarah Jenkins, a bright girl known for her vivid imagination, described an identical figure. Her dreams, however, added a chilling detail. The shadow man was not alone. He was accompanied by a faint, mournful lullaby, a melody that Sarah swore she could still hear, even after waking. Her parents, devout and practical folk, initially attributed it to childhood fears, but Sarah's increasing pallor and reluctance to sleep told a different story. The local doctor, old Dr. Albright, a man who had seen his share of peculiar ailments, found no physical cause for the children's distress. Their fevers were sporadic, their appetites fleeting, but their nightmares were unsettlingly consistent. He prescribed tonics and urged parents to keep their children calm, but his furrowed brow betrayed his own growing unease. Elias, a man with no children of his own, initially viewed the reports with a detached curiosity. He'd hear snippets of conversations during his daily walk to his office. "The Miller boy dreamt it again," one woman would murmur. "And little Susan Peterson, too," another would add, her voice barely a whisper. The consistency was what piqued his interest. Not just nightmares, but the same nightmares. It defied simple explanation. One evening, as rain lashed against his study window, Elias found himself unable to focus on his blueprints. The image of young Thomas Miller's distraught face, glimpsed briefly at the market, kept returning to him. He remembered the boy's wide, terrified eyes, the way he clung to his mother's skirt. Elias, a man who prided himself on his logical mind, felt a prickle of unease. He had always believed in clear causes and effects, but this was different. His housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a woman of sharp wit and even sharper intuition, noticed his distraction. "Still thinking about those poor children, Mr. Vance?" she asked, setting down a cup of tea. "It's a strange business indeed. Never seen anything like it in all my years in Willow Creek. It's almost as if they're connected somehow." Elias merely grunted, stirring his tea. Connected? A peculiar thought, almost mystical, and Elias abhorred mysticism. Yet, the word lingered. How could so many children from different families and different parts of the town share the exact same nocturnal terror? It wasn't merely a coincidence. It felt like a pattern, a disturbing mosaic slowly forming. The air grew heavier as night descended. The wind howled through the eaves, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the unspoken anxieties of Willow Creek. Elias extinguished his lamp, plunging his study into darkness. But sleep would not come easily. The whispers of Willow Creek had become a roar in his own mind, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was just the beginning. The Shadow Man, the silent forest, the mournful lullaby. They were not mere figments of childish imagination. They were a sign, a prelude to something far more sinister unfolding in the quiet, fog-shrouded town. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow this gripping story to its chilling conclusion. This is a work of fiction. The days that followed were marked by a palpable shift in Willow Creek's atmosphere. The usual bustle of daily life was replaced by a subdued tension. Parents clutched their children tighter, their eyes scanning the streets with a newfound apprehension. The playful shouts of children at play were replaced by an eerie quiet, punctuated only by the occasional wail from a disturbed household. Elias Vance found himself drawn deeper into the enigma, compelled by a sense of civic duty and a nagging intellectual curiosity. He began to visit the families affected, not as an investigator but as a concerned citizen seeking answers. His first stop was the Miller farm. Mrs. Miller, a woman usually robust and cheerful, now looked haggard, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights. Thomas sat silently by the hearth, clutching a worn wooden soldier, his gaze distant. "He barely eats, Mr. Vance," she whispered, her voice cracking, "and the screams. They get worse, always the same. The Shadow Man, the dark woods. He says it feels so real, like he's actually there." Mr. Miller, a stoic farmer, nodded grimly, his usual pragmatism replaced by a raw fear. "We've tried everything, Mr. Vance. Dr. Albright says there's nothing wrong with him, yet he fades before our eyes." Elias observed Thomas closely. The boy's skin had an unnatural pallor, and a nervous tremor affected his hands. It wasn't just fear, it was exhaustion, a relentless siege on his young mind. He asked about the details of the dream, trying to elicit more than just the recurring images. "Does the man speak?" Elias asked gently. Thomas shook his head, burying his face in his mother's skirt. "He just watches. And the forest is so quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, just a strange, cold feeling." Next, Elias visited the Jenkins household. Sarah, typically energetic, sat by the window, staring out at the rain-streaked street. Her mother, a woman known for her gossip, was unusually subdued. "The lullaby, Mr. Vance?" Mrs. Jenkins murmured, her voice barely audible. "Sarah hums it sometimes, even when she's awake. A low, mournful tune. It's not a tune I've ever heard before." She hummed a few tentative notes, a chilling minor key melody that seemed to hang heavy in the air. Elias felt a shiver trace down his spine. The consistency of the nightmare elements was astounding. He spent hours meticulously recording the children's accounts, noting every shared detail. The Shadow Man, the silent forest, the cold feeling, and now the mournful lullaby. What perplexed him most was the sheer number of children afflicted. It wasn't an isolated incident, it was a phenomenon. He spoke with Dr. Albright, who admitted his perplexity. "It defies medical explanation, Elias," the doctor confessed, rubbing his temples. "Their bodies are weakening, yes, but it seems to be a symptom, not the cause. It's as if their minds are being drained by this shared torment." Elias began to overlay a map of Willow Creek with the locations of the affected homes. He noticed no discernible pattern related to proximity or socio-economic status. Children from the bustling town center and the secluded farmlands were equally susceptible. This ruled out environmental factors like tainted water or localized gas leaks, theories he had initially considered and quickly discarded. The only common thread was the age range. All the children were between 5 and 10 years old. This too was peculiar. Why only them? Why not older children or adults? It suggested a vulnerability unique to that age group, or perhaps a target specifically chosen. As he delved deeper, Elias felt a growing sense of urgency. The children were not just having bad dreams, they were wasting away. Their vibrant spirits were dimming, replaced by a haunting weariness. The unspoken fear in the town was that something truly dreadful was at play, something beyond their comprehension. One blustery afternoon, while walking past the old abandoned orphanage on the outskirts of town, Elias paused. The building, with its boarded-up windows and peeling paint, had stood empty for years, a relic of a forgotten past. He'd heard rumors about its closure, financial difficulties, a strange outbreak of illness. Nothing concrete, just whispers. But as he looked at the imposing structure, a faint, almost imperceptible sound seemed to carry on the wind. A low, mournful note, barely distinguishable from the sighing of the wind. He dismissed it as his imagination, a trick of the wind, yet the hairs on his arms stood on end. Returning to his study, Elias spread out his notes. The consistency of the dreams, the shared details, the physical deterioration of the children. It pointed to something far more organized than random nightmares. It felt orchestrated, a deliberate act. But by whom? And for what purpose? The questions gnawed at him, pushing him further into a world that defied his ordered understanding. The silence of the town at night, once comforting, now felt heavy with unspoken dread, a prelude to the horrors that might be lurking beneath the surface of Willow Creek. The puzzle pieces were there, scattered and disorienting, but Elias knew he had to connect them before the shadow consumed more of the town's innocent. Elias Vance found himself increasingly isolated in his pursuit of answers. While the townspeople acknowledged the pervasive nature of the nightmares, their fear manifested as a retreat into their own homes, a collective refusal to confront the growing darkness. Dr. Albright, overwhelmed by the increasing number of ailing children, offered little more than weary resignation. Elias knew he had to dig deeper beyond the present into Willow Creek's forgotten past. His investigation led him to the local archives, a dusty, dimly lit room in the basement of the town hall. The air was heavy with the scent of aged paper and forgotten stories. Miss Eliza Thorne, the town's meticulous archivist, a woman as old and stoic as the records she guarded, looked at him with an unreadable expression when he explained his unusual request. "You're seeking answers about these dreams, Mr. Vance? Many have tried to find answers in old papers. Most find only more questions." Elias began sifting through old newspapers, town records, and forgotten ledgers. He was looking for anomalies, patterns, anything that might connect to the current crisis. His fingers, usually stained with ink from architectural drawings, became grimy with dust. Hours blurred into days. He read about mundane council meetings, local scandals, and seasonal festivals. Nothing. Then, amidst a stack of particularly fragile, yellowed newspapers from the late 1860s, a headline caught his eye. "Tragedy at Willow Creek Orphanage. Mysterious illness claims young lives." The date was 1869. Elias's heart quickened. The orphanage, the same one he had passed, the one with the mournful whisper on the wind. The articles detailed a devastating outbreak of a wasting sickness that had swept through the Willow Creek orphanage. Dozens of children, between the ages of 5 and 10, had succumbed. The symptoms described were eerily similar to what he was now seeing: listlessness, loss of appetite, and a pervasive, unexplained fear. There were no mentions of nightmares, but the parallels were too striking to ignore. The articles also spoke of a hurried closure, hushed funerals, and a community eager to forget the tragedy. Elias pressed Miss Thorne for more information about the orphanage. She was reluctant at first, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It was a sad time, Mr. Vance, best left in the past." But Elias was persistent, his logical mind demanding every piece of the puzzle. Eventually, she relented, guiding him to a section of records marked "Orphanage Closed." Within these dusty ledgers, Elias found a detailed register of the children who had lived there, along with sparse notes on their medical conditions. The names of the deceased children were underlined in red ink. As he cross-referenced the dates, a chilling detail emerged. Many of the children who died in 1869 had begun exhibiting their symptoms shortly after the arrival of a new caregiver, a woman named Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne. The name echoed in his mind. He asked Miss Eliza Thorne about her. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossed the archivist's face. "Elias was my great-aunt," Miss Thorne admitted, her voice low. She was a quiet woman, very devoted to the children. She arrived shortly before the sickness took hold. Miss Thorne quickly added, "She was cleared of any wrongdoing, of course. It was simply a terrible illness that swept through." Elias's logical mind, however, wasn't so easily appeased. He noticed a peculiar entry in Elias's personnel file. She had a rare background in folkloric remedies and lullabies from isolated Appalachian communities. This was an unusual qualification for an orphanage caregiver. Why would this be noted? And why lullabies? The mournful melody Sarah Jenkins hummed, the one that persisted after her nightmare. He dug deeper into the orphanage's daily routines. There were records of evening story times and sing-alongs led by Elias Thorne. Could she have been introducing something more than innocent songs? Elias dismissed the thought as fanciful, yet the uncanny timing of her arrival and the outbreak, coupled with the shared, consistent nature of the children's current nightmares, created an unsettling connection. The more he researched, the more an uncomfortable theory began to form. What if the sickness in 1869 wasn't a natural illness, but something induced, something psychological? Could Elias Thorne have been involved in something far more sinister than simple caregiving? The idea was disturbing, defying all logic. But the evidence, however circumstantial, was piling up. He discovered that after the orphanage closed, Elias Thorne had vanished from Willow Creek, leaving no trace. There were no records of her subsequent employment or where she had gone. It was as if she had simply disappeared into the mists from which she came. This sudden disappearance, combined with the mysterious illness, only fueled Elias's suspicions. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the dusty archives, Elias felt a chill deeper than the damp air. He had come seeking answers, and he had found them, but they raised even more terrifying questions. The Shadow Man and the Silent Forest were not new. They were echoes of a past tragedy, replaying themselves in the minds of Willow Creek's children. And Elias Thorne, the mysterious caregiver, seemed to be at the heart of it. But how? And why? The possibility that a similar, orchestrated psychological attack was unfolding now, decades later, was chilling. Elias gathered his notes, his mind racing. The connection between the current nightmares and the orphanage tragedy was undeniable. He had to find out more about Elias Thorne, about those lullabies she sang. The forgotten past was reaching into the present, threatening to consume Willow Creek once more. Armed with the chilling revelations from the town archives, Elias Vance felt a renewed sense of urgency. The connection between the current nightmares and the 1869 orphanage tragedy, particularly the mysterious figure of Elias Thorne, was too strong to ignore. His logical mind, usually reliant on concrete evidence, was now grappling with a disturbing possibility. A pattern of calculated psychological torment resurrected after decades. The next logical step was to visit the abandoned orphanage itself. The old Willow Creek orphanage stood forlornly on the edge of town, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Its boarded-up windows resembled blind eyes, and the peeling paint of its facade gave it a desolate, decaying appearance. The air around it felt heavy, stagnant, as if time itself had forgotten to move within its walls. Elias, usually unflappable, felt a prickle of apprehension as he approached the collapsing front porch. The front door, surprisingly, was not entirely sealed. A broken latch allowed him to force it open with a creak that echoed eerily through the cavernous entrance hall. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic drip of water from a leaky roof somewhere above. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced through cracks in the boarded windows, illuminating the decaying grandeur of a forgotten institution. Elias moved cautiously through the lower floors. The classrooms were empty, littered with fallen plaster and the ghosts of childish laughter. The dining hall was vast and desolate, tables long gone, leaving only faint outlines on the grimy floorboards. Each step he took sent plumes of dust into the air, and the musty scent of decay filled his nostrils. He was searching for anything: a forgotten diary, a hidden compartment, a clue that might explain Elias Thorne's methods or motives. His search led him upstairs to the children's dormitories. Rows of rusted bed frames stood like skeletal sentinels, and the walls were covered in faded childish drawings, crude stick figures, blossoming flowers, and then, disturbingly, several crude sketches of a tall, dark figure with elongated limbs. The Shadow Man. Elias's breath hitched. These drawings, dating back to 1869, were almost identical to what young Thomas Miller had described. The shared nightmare was not just a modern affliction, it was a recurring horror, an echo from the past. The sense of a sinister presence grew stronger as he ascended to the uppermost floor, to the attic. The wooden stairs groaned under his weight, each step a protest against his intrusion. The attic was a jumble of forgotten relics, broken furniture, yellowed textiles, and boxes filled with a child's discarded belongings. It was darker here, the few remaining windows obscured by grime and cobwebs. As he rummaged through a stack of old crates, his hand brushed against something smooth and cold. He pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden music box. It was old, the wood darkened with age, but surprisingly intact. He wound the small key on its side. With a faint click, the lid opened, and a haunting, melancholic melody drifted into the air. It was the lullaby. The same mournful tune Sarah Jenkins had hummed, the one that lingered after her nightmares. Elias felt a wave of profound unease wash over him. This wasn't merely a coincidence. This music box, with its chilling melody, was a direct link to the nightmares, both past and present. But how could a simple music box inflict such terror? He examined it closely, running his fingers over the detailed carvings on its surface. They depicted strange, swirling patterns, almost hypnotic in their repetition. Was there something more to this lullaby, something beyond its notes? Further exploration of the attic revealed a small, hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the chimney. Inside he found a bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and immediately recognizable from the orphanage records. Elias Thorne's. The letters were addressed to an unknown recipient, filled with cryptic references to the work, the harvest, and the seeds of fear. Elias wrote of preparing the soil and cultivating the minds of the children. She spoke of the power of suggestion and the malleability of the young spirit. There was no mention of a shadow man or a forest, but the language was unsettlingly clinical, almost scientific in its cold detachment. She seemed to view the children as experiments, their minds as canvases for her dark artistry. One letter, dated just weeks before the orphanage's closure, contained a particularly chilling passage. The efficacy of the lullaby is undeniable. It implants the image, roots the fear, and creates the susceptibility. The dreams are merely the visible manifestation of the internal shift. The children are now receptive. And the work, though slow, is complete for this cycle. The next generation will be even more so. Elias felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Elara Thorne wasn't just a caregiver, she was a manipulator, a psychological architect of fear. The sickness of 1869 wasn't an illness. It was a deliberate, insidious psychological conditioning. And the music box, with its haunting tune, was a tool, a key to unlock the children's minds. The Shadow Man was merely an image, a construct implanted by the lullaby. But why? What was the purpose of instilling such terror? And how could she be doing it now, decades later, without being present? Had she returned? Or was her influence somehow lingering, waiting to be reactivated? As he descended the creaking stairs, clutching the letters and the music box, a new understanding dawned on Elias. This was not a random series of nightmares. It was a sophisticated, long-game psychological assault. The children were not just dreaming, they were being subtly reprogrammed, their innocent minds made vulnerable. The fog outside seemed to thicken, mirroring the confusion and dread that now clouded Elias's mind. He had found a piece of the puzzle, but it was far more terrifying than he could have imagined. The real mystery wasn't just what was happening, but who was pulling the strings. And if Elara Thorne was truly gone, how was her macabre legacy continuing to plague Willow Creek? If you're finding the macabre mystery of the children who dreamed the same nightmares, as chilling as we are, make sure to subscribe to the channel. This is a work of fiction. The revelations from the orphanage attic hit Elias Vance with the force of a physical blow. The letters, the music box, the chilling connection to the 1869 tragedy. It all painted a picture of a calculated long-term psychological experiment rather than a random series of events. Elara Thorne was not merely a caregiver, she was a cunning manipulator, a true architect of fear. The question that tormented Elias now was, how could her work continue decades after her disappearance? Was she still alive, somehow orchestrating this from the shadows, or was there another, even more disturbing explanation? Elias returned to his study, the letters and the music box laid out on his desk. He meticulously reread Elara's correspondence, searching for any further clues. Her writing was cold, methodical, devoid of empathy. She spoke of phases and optimal conditions for implantation. It was clear she saw the children as subjects, not individuals. The phrase, "the next generation will be even more so," echoed in his mind, hinting at a terrifying legacy. He spent hours examining the music box. Its simple mechanism seemed harmless, yet the melody it produced carried a sinister weight. Elias, not a superstitious man, couldn't shake the feeling that the tune itself was the conduit, the mechanism by which Elara's work was transferred. But how? Was it a form of highly sophisticated hypnosis, a sonic trigger? This concept was far beyond the understanding of 19th century psychology. Determined to understand the psychological principles Elara might have employed, Elias immersed himself in the limited psychological texts available in Willow Creek. He found references to the power of suggestion, the impact of repetitive stimuli on the subconscious, and the unique vulnerability of young minds. He learned about mesmerism, a form of hypnotism, and theories about the human mind's susceptibility to external influence, particularly in a relaxed or suggestible state. Elara's lullaby was clearly designed to exploit these vulnerabilities during sleep, when the conscious mind was at rest. He also sought out Miss Eliza Thorne again, though she was even more guarded after his orphanage visit. Elias confronted her gently but firmly about her great-aunt Elara. "Miss Thorne," he began, "did Elara have any associates? Anyone who shared her interests?" Eliza looked away, wringing her hands. "Elara was a recluse, Mr. Vance, kept to herself. Said she was an observer of the human condition." She hesitated, then, almost reluctantly, added, She did correspond with a Dr. Alistair Finch. He was a physician, but also, how shall I put it, a dabbler in obscure sciences. They met at some sort of conference on the frontiers of the mind, years before she came to Willow Creek. Dr. Alistair Finch. The name was new. Elias felt a surge of adrenaline. Could Finch have been Ilara's accomplice, or even her successor? He asked Miss Thorne if she knew anything about Finch's whereabouts or his field of study. He was from out west, she offered. Nevada, I believe, and his studies. She sometimes spoke of his work on resonant frequencies and mental synchronization. It sounded like nonsense to me. Resonant frequencies, mental synchronization. The terms, though vague, hinted at a scientific, albeit twisted, approach to Ilara's methods. If Ilara had indeed vanished, perhaps Finch had continued her work, or developed his own version of it. Could he be the one reactivating the patterns, amplifying the nightmares in Willow Creek? Elias decided to write to colleagues in academia and science, particularly those specializing in the nascent field of psychology, to inquire about Dr. Alistair Finch and his research. He meticulously drafted letters, describing Ilara Thorne's methods and the uncanny consistency of the nightmares, carefully omitting any details that might sound superstitious. He presented it as a curious case of mass hysteria or an unknown psychological phenomenon, hoping to elicit a response without revealing the full, chilling extent of his suspicions. While waiting for responses, Elias also began to observe the affected children more closely, noting their routines, their sleep patterns, and any subtle environmental factors. He noticed that the children most severely affected often lived in homes where the lullaby, a local folk tune, was sometimes played on pianos or hummed by their parents, innocently unaware of its hidden power. It was a common, albeit lesser-known, Willow Creek melody, one that Ilara Thorne must have intentionally introduced or subtly manipulated into the town's consciousness during her time at the orphanage. She had woven her psychological trap into the fabric of the community itself. The realization was terrifying. The lullaby wasn't just a catalyst, it was the catalyst. A sonic trigger passed down innocently through generations, activating the dormant psychological conditioning Ilara had instilled. The children were not just dreaming. Their subconscious minds were being systematically targeted and shaped by a melody that acted as a silent, invisible toxin. He hypothesized that the unique structure of the music box, combined with the specific frequency of the lullaby, somehow amplified its hypnotic effect. It wasn't a magical charm, but a precisely engineered psychological weapon. This explained how the work could continue decades later. The seed was planted, and the lullaby was the water. The fog outside Elias's window seemed to press closer, obscuring the familiar street lamps. The whispers of Willow Creek had become a chorus of shared torment, a symphony of fear orchestrated by a long-dead, or perhaps still living master. Elias felt a profound weight of responsibility. He was racing against time. The children were fading, their minds under siege. He had to unravel the rest of Ilara Thorne's insidious design and uncover the true source of the recurring nightmare before Willow Creek succumbed to the Shadow Man once and for all. Elias Vance's frantic search for Dr. Alistair Finch yielded a breakthrough. A letter arrived from a renowned psychologist in Boston, a former associate of Finch's, confirming that Finch was indeed a real person. The psychologist, Dr. Eleanor Hadley, described Finch as brilliant but eccentric, obsessed with the subtle manipulation of human consciousness. She detailed Finch's research into auditory frequencies and their effect on brainwave patterns, a field virtually unheard of in 1887. He believed that specific sound patterns could induce states of heightened suggestibility, even within sleep. This information validated Elias's chilling hypothesis about the music box and the lullaby. Ilara Thorne hadn't just stumbled upon a method. She had likely worked with or been influenced by Finch's cutting-edge, ethically questionable research. The lullaby wasn't merely a folk tune. It was a carefully constructed sequence of notes designed to exploit these resonant frequencies, planting the seed of the shadow man and the silent forest deep within the susceptible minds of children. The letters from Ilara, with their cold, scientific language, now made terrifying sense. She was applying Finch's theories to a real-world, horrifying experiment. Dr. Hadley's letter also contained a crucial piece of information. Finch had vanished several years ago after his increasingly unorthodox research drew scrutiny. He was rumored to have retreated to a remote, self-sufficient community in the Catskill Mountains, continuing his work in secret, far from the prying eyes of conventional science. The Catskill Mountains, a remote, isolated location. It fit perfectly with the idea of a reclusive, dangerous intellect. Elias felt a surge of determination. If Finch was still alive, he was the key. He was the one who could explain how Ilara's work continued, or perhaps was even amplifying it. He might be the one pulling the unseen strings. However, leaving Willow Creek was not an option. The children were growing weaker, their waking hours becoming as hazy and fearful as their nights. Their parents, desperate, were now looking to Elias for answers, their initial skepticism replaced by a desperate plea for help. He couldn't abandon them. He needed a proxy, someone he could trust. His thoughts turned to Mrs. Gable, his housekeeper. She was shrewd, observant, and fiercely loyal. More importantly, she had an extensive network of relatives and acquaintances across the state, including a cousin who lived not far from the Catskills. Elias explained the situation to her, carefully omitting the more fantastical elements of Ilara's work, but emphasizing the dire need to locate Dr. Finch and understand his research. Mrs. Gable, though visibly shaken by the gravity of his words, agreed to help. Her concern for the children of Willow Creek outweighed her fear. While Mrs. Gable prepared for her journey, Elias continued his meticulous analysis of the lullaby's structure, using his knowledge of acoustics and pattern recognition. He played the music box repeatedly, tracing the notes on paper, looking for any hidden mathematical or auditory anomalies. He noticed subtle shifts in pitch and rhythm that, while almost imperceptible to the conscious ear, might be designed to target specific brainwave frequencies during sleep. The lullaby was not merely a tune, it was a complex sonic code. He also revisited the children, observing their reactions when the lullaby was inadvertently hummed or played nearby. He found that even a faint exposure to the tune seemed to trigger a subtle flicker of anxiety in their eyes, a momentary disorientation. This strengthened his conviction that the lullaby was the primary vector. The town, meanwhile, was sinking deeper into despair. The general store was quiet, the church attendance dwindling. A sense of collective helplessness permeated the air. Elias knew that time was running out. The physical decline of the children was accelerating. Young Thomas Miller was now confined to bed, barely speaking. His once bright eyes clouded with an inexplicable terror. Sarah Jenkins would often hum the mournful lullaby to herself, seemingly unaware, a chilling manifestation of its insidious hold. As Mrs. Gable departed on her journey, a heavy silence fell over Elias's usually bustling home. He felt a profound sense of isolation. He was challenging not just a medical mystery, but a hidden malevolent force, rooted in an old, twisted science. The weight of Willow Creek's hope rested on his shoulders. He began to formulate a desperate plan, a countermeasure based on his understanding of Ilara's methods. If the lullaby was the key to implanting the nightmare, perhaps a different sound, a different frequency, could counteract it. It was a desperate gamble, a venture into uncharted psychological territory, but he was running out of options. He sketched out designs for a device, a sort of anti-music box, that could emit a carefully calibrated counter-frequency, a sonic antidote. The nights in Willow Creek were now punctuated by the cries of frightened children, a haunting symphony that echoed through the fog. Elias worked tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that each passing moment brought the town closer to a complete collapse. The unseen strings were tightening, and he had to sever them before they choked the life out of Willow Creek's children. His search for answers had led him down a path far darker and more convoluted than he could have ever imagined. A path where the lines between science and terror blurred into an horrifying reality. Days stretched into a grueling week. Elias Vance worked feverishly in his study, transforming it into a makeshift laboratory. His architectural precision, usually applied to blueprints and stress calculations, was now focused on a desperate, uncharted psychological experiment. He was attempting to design a device that could counteract the insidious influence of Elara Thorne's lullaby. His theory was simple, yet audacious. If a specific frequency could induce fear, another could perhaps neutralize it, or even reharmonize the disrupted minds of the children. He had acquired various components from the town's clockmaker and a retired telegraph operator. Gears, springs, delicate wires, and a small, precise tuning fork. He spent hours meticulously experimenting with different tones and vibrations, consulting his rudimentary understanding of acoustics and the few sparse notes he'd gleaned from Dr. Hadley's letter about Finch's resonant frequencies. He hypothesized that a specific harmonious frequency could disrupt the Shadow Man implantation. It was a shot in the dark, based on fragmented information, but it was all he had. The physical state of the children continued to worsen. Young Thomas Miller was now barely conscious, his breathing shallow. Sarah Jenkins was prone to catatonic states, mumbling fragments of the mournful lullaby. Dr. Albright, at his wit's end, admitted to Elias, "I've sent for specialists from Philadelphia, but I fear it will be too late. Their vital signs are failing, as if their very will to live is being siphoned away." Elias knew he had to act before the specialists even arrived. His device, a small, intricate contraption of brass and wood, resembled a complex music box, but its purpose was to emit a sustained, clear, and harmonious tone at a precise, calculated frequency. He called it the harmonizer. It was a desperate gamble, a last resort against an unseen enemy. Just as he was putting the finishing touches on the harmonizer, a telegram arrived from Mrs. Gable. It was brief, coded but clear. "Found Finch, remote cabin, not well, urgent." Elias's heart pounded. Finch was alive, and perhaps more importantly, vulnerable. This was a critical piece of the puzzle. If Finch was involved, he could confirm Elara's methods, and perhaps even possess the knowledge to truly undo the damage. With a heavy heart, Elias made the decision to test the harmonizer on the most critical case, Thomas Miller. He spoke to the boy's parents, their faces etched with despair. "This is unconventional," he explained, holding up the strange device. "But it's based on the same principles as what has afflicted him. It may offer a chance." The Millers, with nothing left to lose, agreed, their eyes holding a fragile flicker of hope. Elias set the harmonizer on Thomas's bedside table. The room was dark, save for the flickering candlelight. Thomas lay pale and still, his chest rising and falling faintly. Elias wound the small mechanism. A soft, clear, resonant tone began to emanate from the harmonizer, a pure, unwavering hum that seemed to fill the room, pushing back against the oppressive silence. It was not a melody, but a sustained, soothing frequency. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then, Thomas stirred. His eyelids fluttered. A low moan escaped his lips, but it was different, less a cry of terror, and more a sound of discomfort, as if something was being dislodged. Elias watched, his breath held. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the rigid tension in Thomas's small body began to ease. His breathing became more regular, After several minutes, he opened his eyes. They were still wide, but the terror that had clouded them for weeks had lessened, replaced by a profound weariness. He looked around the room, bewildered. Then his gaze settled on Elias. The Shadow Man. He's gone, Thomas whispered, his voice raspy. The quiet forest. It's not so quiet now. I hear a different sound. Elias felt a wave of relief wash over him, quickly followed by a renewed sense of purpose. It worked. The harmonizer, crude as it was, had an effect. It wasn't a complete cure, but it had broken the insidious hold of the nightmare. The fear had receded, leaving behind only the exhaustion of battle. He instructed the Millers to keep the harmonizer near Thomas, to play it periodically, especially before sleep. He then moved on to Sarah Jenkins, and then to other children, administering the counter-melody. The results were consistent. A lessening of the nightmares, a break in the psychological grip, and a gradual, though slow, return to their natural state of mind. The immediate physical decline slowed, and a faint spark of life began to return to their eyes. However, Elias knew this was only a temporary measure, a reprieve. The ultimate solution lay with Dr. Alistair Finch. He held the deeper knowledge, the keys to Elara Thorne's complete methodology, and perhaps the full extent of her work. The telegram from Mrs. Gable was a call to action. He needed to find Finch, to understand the true nature of the resonant frequencies and the mental synchronization Elara had exploited. The harmonizer was a band-aid, but Finch might hold the cure. The fog outside Elias's window finally began to lift, revealing a sliver of weak sunlight. It felt like a small victory, a glimmer of hope in the pervasive darkness. But the mystery was far from over. He had confronted Elara Thorne's legacy, but the unseen strings that continued to manipulate Willow Creek were still connected to a living source, a reclusive scientist hiding in the mountains. Elias knew his most dangerous journey was yet to begin. Remember to subscribe to the channel for the thrilling conclusion. This is a work of fiction. Elias Vance, leaving the harmonizer prototypes with Dr. Albright and instructing the parents on their use, prepared for his journey. The partial success of the harmonizer, while a relief, had only amplified his conviction that Dr. Alistair Finch held the complete solution. With Mrs. Gable's cryptic telegram as his only guide, he set off for the Catskill Mountains. The transition from the fog-laden familiarity of Willow Creek to the rugged, imposing wilderness of the Catskills was stark. The urban landscape gave way to dense forests, winding trails, and the looming presence of ancient peaks. The journey was arduous. The weather turned quickly, from crisp autumn air to biting winds and unexpected early snow flurries. Elias, accustomed to the ordered world of city streets, found himself navigating treacherous terrain, his resolve tested by the sheer isolation. He traveled by train as far as possible, then hired a sturdy horse and a taciturn local guide who knew the mountain trails like the back of his hand. The guide, a man named Silas, seemed wary, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line, muttering about lost souls and things best left undisturbed as they ascended. Mrs. Gable's cousin, a weathered woman named Martha, met them at a remote crossroads tavern, her face etched with concern. She confirmed Finch's location. A secluded cabin nestled deep in a valley known as Shadow Gorge, accessible only by a treacherous, overgrown path. "He's a strange one, Mr. Vance," Martha warned, lowering her voice. "Comes into town maybe once a month for supplies. Always keeps to himself. And he looks haunted. His eyes, they're like deep, dark pools." The trek to Shadow Gorge was slow and arduous, the path barely discernible beneath fallen leaves and encroaching undergrowth. The air grew colder, the silence deeper, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the distant cry of a hawk. The trees pressed in, their branches forming a tangled canopy that allowed only dappled light to penetrate. Elias felt an oppressive sense of foreboding, a primal warning that he was venturing into a place where the veil between the known and unknown was dangerously thin. Finally, through a thicket of gnarled pines, the cabin appeared. It was a rustic, unkempt structure nestled precariously on the side of a steep incline. Smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, the only sign of life. A peculiar metallic hum seemed to emanate from within, a low, pulsating vibration that Elias felt more than heard. It was distinct from the harmonizer's pure tone. This felt discordant, unsettling. As they approached, Elias noticed a series of strange, almost alien-looking antennae fashioned from copper wire and glass insulators, protruding from the cabin's roof and stretching into the surrounding trees. They hummed faintly, catching the light in an unnatural way. This was no ordinary recluse's dwelling. It was a sophisticated laboratory disguised by its remote location. Elias instructed Silas and Martha to wait at a safe distance. He approached the cabin alone, his hand on the sturdy revolver he'd reluctantly acquired before leaving Willow Creek. He knocked on the heavy wooden door. Silence. He knocked again, louder this time. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing the gaunt figure of Dr. Alistair Finch. Finch was a man ravaged by his obsessions. His once sharp features were sunken, his skin pale and almost translucent. His eyes, as Martha had described, were indeed like dark pools, but they also held a terrifying brilliance, the light of a mind consumed by its own brilliance and its dark work. He wore simple, stained clothes and his hands trembled slightly. The metallic hum from within the cabin was louder now, a constant low thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. "Mr. Vance," Finch rasped, his voice hoarse, as if unused. He seemed to have been expecting him. "I presume you've come about Ilara's legacy." Elias was momentarily taken aback by Finch's directness. "Her legacy is causing immense suffering in Willow Creek," he stated, his voice firm despite his internal apprehension. "The children are dying." A flicker of something, not remorse, but perhaps a detached curiosity, crossed Finch's face. "A predictable outcome," he said, turning and stepping back, inviting Elias inside. Ilara was impatient. She rushed the process. "The human mind is delicate, Mr. Vance. It must be conditioned slowly, meticulously." The interior of the cabin was a chaotic blend of a hermit's dwelling and a mad scientist's lair. Bookshelves overflowed with obscure texts on acoustics, psychology, and forgotten sciences. Desks were piled high with diagrams of complex circuitry, strange bell-shaped instruments, and elaborate charts mapping brainwave patterns. The metallic hum was clearly emanating from a large, intricate machine in the center of the room, a complex array of resonating chambers, tuning forks, and what appeared to be modified gramophone horns. This was the source of the resonant frequencies. "This," Finch gestured to the machine with a proprietary sweep of his hand, "is the culmination of my life's work. The synchronizer. It amplifies and projects specific sound frequencies, subtly influencing the human subconscious." Ilara merely used a crude, localized version, the lullaby, the music box. "I have refined it, expanded its reach." Elias's blood ran cold. "You've been projecting this nightmare across vast distances." Finch smiled, a chilling, joyless expression. "Not the nightmare itself, Mr. Vance, the susceptibility to the nightmare. The lullaby creates the imprint, the initial vulnerability. My synchronizer then amplifies that vulnerability, broadcasting a subliminal frequency that reinforces the implanted image, making the dream more vivid, more real, more draining. It's the final stage of the conditioning." Ilara's letters spoke of the harvest. "This is it. the complete systematic draining of mental fortitude powered by fear. "But why?" Elias demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of horror and anger. "Why inflict such terror on innocent children?" Finch's eyes, burning with a feverish intensity, fixed on Elias. "Because, Mr. Vance," he whispered, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, "true psychological manipulation requires the complete dissolution of the conscious mind. Fear is the purest solvent. And once dissolved, the mind becomes a blank slate, ready to be remade, ready to serve a higher purpose." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Ilara and I believed that by dissolving the individual mind, we could tap into a collective consciousness, a shared mental reservoir. The children were merely the first step in unlocking this ultimate potential." Elias realized the true, horrifying scope of their madness. They weren't just creating nightmares. They were attempting to dismantle human consciousness itself, using fear as their weapon. Finch was not just continuing Ilara's work, he was perfecting it, amplifying it, pushing it to its terrifying ultimate conclusion. The fate of Willow Creek's children, and perhaps countless others, now hung in the balance, dependent on Elias's ability to stop this deranged architect of fear. The chilling confession from Dr. Alistair Finch left Elias Vance reeling. The true scope of Ilara Thorne's and Finch's ambition was far grander and far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. They weren't just inducing nightmares, they were attempting to dissolve individual consciousness, to reshape minds for some warped, higher purpose. The children of Willow Creek were merely pawns in a grand, horrifying psychological experiment. "You speak of dissolving the conscious mind," Elias said, trying to keep his voice steady, "for a higher purpose. What purpose could possibly justify such cruelty?" Finch's feverish eyes gleamed. "Imagine, Mr. Vance, a world without individual conflict, without dissenting thoughts. A collective mind perfectly aligned, perfectly efficient. We believed we could unlock a universal consciousness, a state of ultimate unity. The children, being the most malleable, were the ideal subjects to prove our theory of mental synchronization. The fear, the nightmares, they were merely the purification process, burning away the dross of individuality." He coughed again, a deep, rattling sound, clearly a man consumed not just by his work, but by a creeping illness. Elias noticed Finch's physical deterioration. He was pale, sweating, and trembled uncontrollably. "This purification process," Elias stated, "is killing them. The children in Willow Creek are fading. Your experiment is destroying them." Finch waved a dismissive hand. "A necessary sacrifice. There are always casualties in the pursuit of scientific truth." Ilara was too aggressive, too impatient. The gradual dissolution is key. The current generation in Willow Creek carries a residual susceptibility from the 1869 experiment. My synchronizer merely reactivates and amplifies it, accelerating the process. It is the natural progression of our initial work. Elias's gaze fell upon the monstrous synchronizer dominating the room. It hummed with a low, insidious energy, a silent perpetrator of the children's torment. "And the lullaby?" Elias pressed. "The one from the music box? What is its precise function in this horrifying scheme?" "Ah, the Willow Creek lullaby, as Ilara fondly called it." Finch chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. "It contains a unique auditory signature, a specific sequence of notes that resonates with the developing neural pathways of young minds. When played during their formative years, especially during sleep, it bypasses the conscious filters and implants a deep-seated vulnerability, a subconscious trigger. The Shadow Man is merely a symbolic representation of fear, a placeholder image. My synchronizer then broadcasts a reinforcing frequency, a silent hum, that resonates with this trigger, amplifying the fear response and draining their mental reserves. Elias's mind raced. The harmonizer, his crude device, had worked because it inadvertently disrupted that reinforcing frequency. It wasn't a cure, but a temporary shield. The true solution was to silence the synchronizer. "You've been broadcasting this frequency for weeks," Elias accused, his voice rising. "Why now? Why Willow Creek and why children?" Ilara believed in cycles. Finch rasped, clutching his chest. "Generational susceptibility. The children of Willow Creek now carry the dormant imprint, passed down through their ancestors from the original orphanage experiment. It's like a genetic predisposition to a psychological pathogen. And Willow Creek is isolated enough, quiet enough, for the signal to have maximum impact without external interference." He paused, a strange, triumphant look in his eyes. "And I needed to complete her work, to prove her theories, to realize the ultimate potential of consciousness manipulation." Suddenly, Finch stumbled, clutching a sharp pain in his side. He swayed, his face contorting. The air in the cabin seemed to grow heavier, permeated by the unsettling hum of the synchronizer and the metallic tang of fear. Elias realized Finch was ill, perhaps dying, consumed by his own dangerous experiments. "The harmonizer," Elias blurted. "I've created a device. It emits a counter-frequency. It seems to be disrupting the nightmares, offering the children some relief." Finch's eyes widened, not with anger, but with a strange, almost scientific interest. "A counter-frequency," he whispered, struggling to stand upright. "Impossible. My calculations are precise. No ordinary sound could override the synchronizer's resonance." "It's a pure, sustained tone," Elias explained, "designed to create a harmonious interference." Finch staggered towards a complex diagram on his desk, covered in intricate mathematical equations. His fingers traced lines of frequencies and wave patterns. "Harmonious interference," he murmured, his mind still sharp despite his failing body. "Could it be resonance cancellation? If the frequency is precisely inverse, a perfect destructive interference." His eyes lit up with a terrifying, fleeting brilliance. "Brilliant. You've created a temporary antidote, Mr. Vance, a nullifier. But it can only work if the synchronizer itself is generating the primary destructive frequency. To truly reverse the effect, one must oversaturate the field with the opposing resonance." He stumbled back from the desk, collapsing onto a nearby stool, gasping for breath. "The synchronizer. It must be stopped," he wheezed, his voice weakening. "Its power. It's too immense now. It's consuming everything." A final hacking cough racked his body. Elias realized that Finch, in his twisted pursuit of ultimate control, had created a device far more powerful and unstable than even he had fully comprehended. The synchronizer wasn't just broadcasting, it was consuming, drawing energy from the fear it generated, feeding on the very minds it sought to control, becoming a self-sustaining engine of psychological destruction. And Finch, the architect, was now a victim of his own creation, slowly being consumed by the very energy he had unleashed. The metallic hum of the synchronizer pulsed faster, louder, filling the cabin with an unbearable pressure. Elias had to act, and fast. He looked at the complex array of dials and levers on the synchronizer, a jumble of incomprehensible controls. He needed to find a way to disable it, to silence its insidious hum before it drained the last breath of life from Willow Creek's children, and perhaps even from Finch himself. The battle wasn't just against a man, but against a machine, a resonant engine of fear. The air in Finch's cabin thrummed with a terrifying intensity. The synchronizer, a monstrous heart of brass and wire, pulsed with an almost audible malevolence, its hum growing louder, more dissonant. Finch lay slumped on his stool, his breathing shallow, his face a ghostly pallor, the true cost of his ambition laid bare. Elias Vance knew he had mere moments to act. "How do I stop it?" Elias demanded, his voice strained above the machine's oppressive thrum. "Tell me how to disable the synchronizer." Finch's eyes flickered open, a last spark of his formidable intellect burning through the haze of his illness. "The core. The resonance chamber," he wheezed, pointing a trembling finger towards a central glowing crystal within the synchronizer's intricate mechanism. It must be overloaded, with a counter-frequency, not merely cancelled, but overwhelmed, a powerful opposing pulse. He coughed, a desperate rattling sound. The harmonizer, amplified to its maximum. His voice faded, his eyes glazing over as he slipped into unconsciousness. Elias understood. His harmonizer, crude as it was, held the key. It produced the specific, harmonious frequency needed to disrupt the synchronizer. But his small hand-cranked device lacked the power to overwhelm Finch's colossal machine. He needed to amplify its output, to somehow feed its counter-frequency directly into the heart of the synchronizer. His gaze darted around the cluttered laboratory. Wires, electrodes, complex diagrams, all the tools of Finch's dark science were at hand. Elias, an architect, understood principles of energy transfer and structural integrity. He spotted a series of large lead-acid batteries connected to the synchronizer, presumably for its power. Then his eyes fell upon a heavy brass bell-shaped instrument, a massive resonator, clearly designed to amplify sound. A desperate plan formed in his mind. He would connect his harmonizer to the resonator, then find a way to channel that amplified counter-frequency directly into the synchronizer's core. It was incredibly dangerous. An overload could cause a catastrophic explosion, or worse, permanently damage the very fabric of reality within the cabin. But the lives of Willow Creek's children hung in the balance. Working with frantic speed, Elias disconnected one of the power cables leading from the batteries to the synchronizer. He then carefully, his hands trembling, wired his small harmonizer to the large brass resonator. He stripped the end of the disconnected power cable, exposing the copper wires. He would have to manually touch these wires to the resonator's output, creating a direct raw surge of the counter frequency. It was crude, risky, and incredibly precise. The metallic hum of the synchronizer grew to an unbearable pitch, vibrating through Elias's very bones. He could almost feel the fear it generated, pressing in on him, threatening to overwhelm his own mind. He thought of young Thomas Miller's pale face, of Sarah Jenkins's haunted eyes. He could not fail. Taking a deep breath, Elias wound his harmonizer to its maximum. The small device emitted its pure, clear tone, a beacon of order against the chaos of the synchronizer. Then, with a prayer, he pressed the exposed power wires from the batteries firmly against the output terminals of the brass resonator. A blinding flash of light erupted. A deafening, high-pitched whine shrieked through the cabin, a sound of immense power meeting its opposing force. The air crackled with energy, and the cabin shook violently. Sparks flew, and the smell of ozone filled the room. The synchronizer glowed with an incandescent, unstable light, its intricate mechanisms vibrating erratically. Elias held on, gritting his teeth against the overwhelming assault on his senses. He felt a searing heat in his hands, and the sound threatened to shatter his eardrums. For a terrifying, eternal moment, it seemed as if the synchronizer would explode, taking him and the entire cabin with it. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The blinding light faded. The deafening shriek ceased. The violent tremors subsided. The hum of the synchronizer vanished, replaced by an eerie, profound silence. Smoke billowed from the machine, and its glowing crystal was dull, lifeless, shattered within its casing. Elias, gasping for breath, slumped against a table, his body trembling, his ears ringing. He had done it. The synchronizer was silenced. He stumbled over to Finch. The doctor's chest was no longer rising. His face, though still pale, had a strange, almost peaceful expression. The brilliant madness in his eyes was gone, replaced by the vacant stare of death. Finch had been consumed by his own creation, but in his final moments, perhaps, he had found a twisted form of peace by guiding Elias to dismantle it. Elias stumbled out of the cabin, into the crisp, cold mountain air. Silas and Martha rushed forward, their faces etched with fear and relief. "What happened?" Silas demanded, looking at the smoking cabin. "It's over," Elias said, his voice hoarse. "The source of the nightmares, it's been destroyed." He spent the next few hours meticulously dismantling the synchronizer, ensuring every component was destroyed beyond repair. He buried Finch's body under a silent pine tree, a lonely grave for a brilliant, tormented mind. The journey back to Willow Creek was a quiet one, filled with an unspoken understanding. As they descended from the mountains, Elias felt a profound lightness, a sense of relief he hadn't known in weeks. The oppressive fog that had clung to Willow Creek finally began to lift, symbolically, literally, as he approached the town limits. Upon his return, he found Willow Creek transformed. The harmonizers, crude as they were, had stemmed the tide of the nightmares. And with the ultimate source of the amplification gone, the children began to recover, slowly but surely. Their eyes regained their sparkle, their appetites returned, and their laughter once again echoed through the streets. The Shadow Man had receded, becoming a fading, distant memory, replaced by the return of vibrant childhood dreams. Elias Vance, the architect of buildings, had become the architect of peace. He had faced a hidden psychological terror, and through logic, perseverance, and a daring gamble, had restored harmony to Willow Creek. The macabre mystery of the children who dreamed the same nightmares had found its resolution, not in supernatural forces, but in the chilling reality of human ambition, scientific manipulation, and the enduring power of a single courageous man to push back against the encroaching shadow. Willow Creek would remember the autumn of 1887, not as the season of nightmares, but as the time when light finally triumphed over darkness.